Arda, if you want, let's talk about Gaza for a bit. The situation in Gaza is really bad, but when we talk in numbers, hey, hold on, nobody's leaving. Look, I brought up the topic of Gaza, and everyone immediately starts leaving. Don't go. Where are you going, guys? When it comes to talking, everyone acts like they're tearing Gaza down to the ground. But when it comes to action, nobody even leaves a word on top of another. But whenever I bring up Gaza, you all just hit the gas and run away. Shall we all talk about it together? We need to talk about this issue. The whole world is talking about this topic. Arda, now there are new details coming out. We're seeing these images now. But even with these images, we actually don't know what life is really like in Gaza. See, right now, for example, these guys are taking this truck, and look, the others are throwing stones at them. Are you aware of that? Now they're even dropping aid from the air. And at the same time, for example, tons of aid is just waiting at the Gaza border as far as the eye can see. But with new interviews and the accounts of new witnesses actually living in Gaza, the picture is becoming a bit clearer, beyond just the numbers. What kind of life are they actually living? Why is there this kind of looting going on? Can you share with us the latest information? What's the current situation?
Actually, we need to go back a bit first. Starting from 2023, the United Nations took over providing aid to Gaza. For 21 months, up until May of this year, the people of Gaza were able to meet certain needs at points set up by the United Nations. Of course, as Israel expanded its attacks and forced people in Gaza to move from north to south, the number of aid points here decreased. The things the United Nations could do became limited, but they were still ongoing. And now, as we've learned, and I'll mention the source in a moment, it was actually working quite well. So at the very least, it was functioning as much as it could in these circumstances. However, Israel kept insisting for months that this aid was going to Hamas. They claimed that Hamas was seizing the aid. That's why they said, "We don't want aid." They kept insisting, and after breaking the ceasefire in March, by May they had completely removed the United Nations from the region. So, who took their place? A newly established organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Organization, supposedly set up in February 2025, which is actually just a front monitored by Israeli soldiers, staffed by U.S. contracted volunteers, and protected by U.S. soldiers. An aid organization created by the U.S.-Israel partnership took over the responsibility. However, once this organization took over, things really started to go downhill. In fact, the incidents we've been hearing about since May, like shootings in those aid lines and the worsening hunger situation, are all the result of developments since May. And ever since the United Nations stepped aside and the Israel-American controlled company took over, things have gotten much worse over the past 2 months. That's pretty much the situation. Now, one of those soldiers, Baret Tony Aguilar, was there until June 14th. His contract ended on June 14th, and since 6 weeks have passed, he started giving interviews as of this past Monday, meaning earlier this week. On Wednesday, he spoke to Chris Van Hollen. He's a Democratic senator from the U.S., representing Maryland. He also does programs himself. Yesterday, he spoke to Teen Carson as well, and at the same time, Bernie Sanders shared a clip of him. It's always the same guy, basically telling the same stories. I've watched all of them. Honestly, Mr. CÜNEYT, if this were a movie, I'd turn it off.
So, what does he talk about? What's life like over there? I mean, how does it go? For example, where do these people who go to help come from? How far do they walk? Can you explain it?
Yes, let me explain it like this. Tony Aguilar already has a hard time explaining it. Sometimes he tells it in a really emotional way. I'll also try to keep myself together as much as I can, because it affected me a lot too. Now, apparently there are about 400 aid points. The United Nations, in the period before May that we mentioned, had reduced this number to 4, and all of them are in the south. Now, not all of the people of Gaza are in the south. Yes, they're constantly being displaced, but people have to walk 8 to 10 kilometers to reach those aid points at the very south. That's one thing. They're already going in barefoot. Most of them don't even have clothes on. The guy keeps sharing his observations. He's one of those contract workers who's always been there. One of the Green Berets. Let's remind people of that. About 600 trucks used to come in a day. He says it's dropped to an average of 18 trucks, and we even hear that it's sometimes less than that. He's talking about the time he spent there that June. They're free. He says it's like the Hunger Games. Just stand in front of them. So, they walk those 12 kilometers and finally arrive. There, they first stop the people. There's a relief point where the soldiers are stationed. There's a stretch of a few hundred meters in between. Then, all of a sudden...
But they're only allowed to walk in one direction.
They walk in a single direction.
There's a one-way walking path, so that there's no coming and going, just one way. Look at this system, man. I mean, the Israelis have set up a dystopian system there. You wake up every morning at the crack of dawn and walk 6 to 12 kilometers south. If you're somewhere in the middle, there are 2 million people. You can't keep 2 million people in the south. Some of them are staying in the middle. The north is already completely devastated. There's no one left up there anymore. You walk 6 to 10 kilometers, all in a single direction. You arrive there. Yeah, go on from there.
They give a start signal, just like we saw in Squid Game. Like in Hunger Games, people suddenly start running around because there's limited food and they don't know what to do. There's no chain of command at all. The soldier talks about this too, and then they just start shooting randomly with whatever excuse, like the control area was too close or people were scattered. Tony Aguilar even says that they fired randomly in the dark. And actually, maybe 5 or 10% of the people there, if they managed to survive the random gunfire without grabbing anything, would end up picking up flour that had spilled on the ground. He says, I saw children picking up pasta with their hands, and they can't go back. This is actually the main point. I think this is the most important message he's giving. They're not allowed to return to where they came from. People who do return from there are taken to the gathering camps in the south of the region. So basically, it's like saying, how does a fish get caught on a hook? I'm sorry for using this expression, of course. I don't want to put it this way, but they're literally gathering people there and then not letting them return north. And in this way, they've drawn people all the way from the north to the south. He tells the story of a boy named ÖZDEMİR. This was actually the most reported story. There's footage of him as well. He took his own photos. Of course, there's no video. Let's go through the photos. So ÖZDEMİR comes in, his clothes all torn, and he gives away one of the things he has in his hand. The tones, the roses, the soldier. He keeps saying thank you, and kisses his hand. Of course, the soldier gets emotional here too, saying, at least I saw that I could help someone. He also says, even if we can't help most of them, they still come and thank us. At the very least, when they see our intention and realize we're here to help, they thank us. They don't know English anyway. There's only one interpreter for every 1,000 people. He says, we're in the middle of chaos. Anyway, this officer kisses his hand and leaves, then comes back. So, as they were heading back toward these collection camps, or rather gathering areas, suddenly random gunfire broke out again, and a couple of minutes later, I saw that everyone was on the ground. He says, one of the children who died was him. He tells another story. Again, it's news about aid. So, they're waiting in line for aid. While they're waiting for the signal to go get the aid, it gets crowded. Of course, there's a stampede. The father puts his children on his shoulders. Then he learns this from one of the American soldiers there who speaks Hebrew. They say that word gets to the sniper at the IDP site, and he's told to shoot these children. He says, wait a minute, what's going on? Somehow, I intervened. You saved those children's lives, he says. So, they were telling the sniper to shoot the child sitting on his father's shoulders. And another important point he mentions is that the Israeli soldiers there are not experienced, not trained. They have no combat training. They gather the lowest ranking soldiers there, people who don't really know what they're doing, and give the order to open fire randomly. For example, they give the order to shoot the one on his shoulders, and the American soldier is there too, and he says that some American soldiers were also responsible for this. He says, the reason I'm telling this is so that the American people know what's happening here. Because clearly, nobody knows. He says, this position doesn't align with your values or your purpose there. And this is a man who has been in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and Somalia in Africa. He's been to 12 different countries. He just recently left his post. He says, I've never seen anything even close to this when faced with the obsession. I mean, this oppression inflicted on people who don't even have weapons, this lack of a chain of command, an environment where nobody knows what anyone else is doing. He says, I've never seen such an inhumane environment. And now, he started talking about this on every channel, one by one. We've already been talking about this shift in perception for the past 2 or 3 days, but probably the most vivid example is someone who was actually there, a US soldier, telling all this with complete honesty. Of course, now they're saying that very soon the Zionist US lobby might try to portray him as someone who gets paid by Islamist Qatar or Hamas. They're saying on social media, be ready. So, that's the kind of environment we're in. He also has a couple of first-hand stories, but that's probably just 1%, maybe 5% of what actually happened. I mean, just the part that reaches us.
Yes, but at least, as I said, this Israeli propaganda thing is falling apart. Because right now, for example, if you look at some media outlets in England or America, there are idiots making fun of the situation. There's a guy who comes out and says, yes, that child died, but his mother was very overweight, she was obese. For example, in England, a female anchor came out and said, these are Hamas. She says they're using these as theater against Israel. Of course, when you see these images, this is no longer theater. I mean, even if Hollywood wrote the biggest movie script, nothing like this would happen. You just wouldn't get something like this out of it. But we can see that this propaganda has also collapsed. Even if it collapses, it's pointless. Right now, in 2025, we're facing an unbelievable genocide. And unfortunately, the situation in Gaza is not getting any better. Every day, it's getting worse. Well, thank you very much. You're welcome, dear.